Hi friends, in today's live session, we'll be dealing with the topic Indian logic. As you all know, this is an area which is recently updated in our syllabus for Nta Ugc net. So in today's session, what we are going to do is we'll be just analyzing a few questions that were asked in June 2020 net exam, which was based on this particular area. The questions that were asked from Indian logic. It's not just like we are dealing with some questions. It's like we'll be trying to figure out the answers of several questions that were asked in the previous exam, as well as I'll be just introducing to you 5 to 6 major areas that you should not skip when you're preparing for Nta Ugc net and JRF paper 1. So basically, through this session, we are trying to figure out the answers for certain questions that were asked in the previous exam, and also I'll be introducing to you 5 to 6 major topics that comes under Indian logic that we need to study. Moving towards our first question. So I'll just read out the question for you. Anil's participation in classroom is indifferent. His parents do not find him to be active either, but his performance in examinations ranges from being good to outstanding. Therefore, he must be studying privately in a clandestine way. This is an example of which kind of Pramana. So your focus should be on this particular word, that is Pramana. And you have the options Upamana, Anumana, Anupalabdhi, and finally Arthapatti. So basically this question is from the area Pramana or Pramanas. So as I have mentioned earlier, this is one of the most important areas that you have to study under Indian logic. So what is this Pramana? We'll be trying to figure out this, the definition of Pramana, what is Pramana, what are the 6 various Pramanas, and then we'll be trying to answer this question as well. So Pramana is basically the valid sources through which we are obtaining knowledge. So when we consider the sources of knowledge that we are obtaining, we have various kinds of sources. But this Pramana is focusing on some of the major areas or some of the major sources or valid sources from which one can obtain knowledge. So this particular Pramanas can be considered as a concept that is associated with Indian epistemology. So epistemology is a term that refers to the study of knowledge, right? Epistemology is the study of knowledge, and Pramana is actually the core concept that is associated with Indian epistemology. So as I have said earlier, Pramanas includes 6 different Pramanas, and these are 6 different valid sources of knowledge. And this includes the following Pramanas. We have Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Arthapatti, Anupalabdhi, and Shabda. These are the 6 major types of Pramanas. So when we consider these 6 types of Pramanas, we'll be just considering each of this, and I'll be just giving you a general idea about these 6 Pramanas. So when we consider Pratyaksha can be called as perception. So these are the various knowledges that we're getting through our perception. When we're seeing something and when we're directly perceiving something, that kind of knowledge or that source of knowledge can be called as Pratyaksha. So it's our perception. We are seeing things and we are understanding things. That is Pratyaksha. Then we have Anumana. So Anumana means inference. So that means all the knowledges or all the information is not received directly, right? We cannot perceive everything directly. So in order to get information, at times we use deduction. So when we see something, we will deduce something, we'll be logically analyzing that thing, and we'll be deducing certain inferences out of the set of things that we have in front of us. So perception means we are directly seeing and perceiving things, but that is not possible in all the cases. So when it comes to Anumana or inference, what we are doing, we are seeing certain things, and from that we will be logically arriving into certain conclusions, or we are deducing certain inferences. That can be called as Anumana or inference. Then we have Upamana. So what is Upamana? Upamana can be called as comparison in English. So it can be called as comparison. So what happens in Upamana? We are trying to figure out the resemblances between various things, and we are trying to understand certain concepts. So we cannot understand everything and anything directly. So using Upamana, if we are saying that this thing is like this, So a common example that we are using for this particular kind of pramana is like that. If a person who is not that familiar with wild ox, if he said that wild ox resembles a cow, when he sees a wild ox, he will try to, or he will understand that this particular animal resembles a cow, and then he assumes, or then he come to a point or a conclusion that, okay, this animal resembles a cow, a wild ox is actually resembling a cow, so obviously this might be a wild ox. So what the process that is involved in this kind of acquisition of knowledge is upamana. We are comparing different things, and we are trying to know about those things that we are unknown to. We are comparing those things to known things. There are things that are unknown to us. We'll be comparing those unknown things to the known things, and then we'll be trying to understand these unknown things. So that is the basic idea. We're just comparing and studying. That is upamana. Then we have Shabda. Shabda is basically verbal testimony. So Shabda is the knowledge that we are getting through words. This can include both oral and as well as written words. So if you're reading a particular book or you're listening to a lecture, so the knowledge that you're getting through these types of modes or these resources can be called as Shabda or verbal testimony. So one of the important things that we have to understand or we have to consider when it comes to Shabda is that I have already said Shabda is basically the information or knowledge that we're getting through words. It can be written as well as it can be in the form of oral communication, or it can be received through it can be received orally or in written format. But the thing is, the source should be valid. This Shabda or verbal testimony, if you're reading a book and if you're referring to a book, you have to make sure that this particular book is authentic. The information that you're getting from this particular book is authentic. You cannot go and read whatever things and acquire knowledge. You have to make sure that the thing that you're referring to is authentic, or the person to whom you're listening to, that person should be a trustworthy person, or we can call him as the apta. A trustworthy person can be called apta. So Shabda is basically the verbal testimony or the knowledge that we're getting through words. That can be through in written formats, or also we can acquire it orally. Anyway, the source should be valid. The source should be authentic, or the person to whom you are listening should be a person who is having authentic knowledge about that. Then we have Arthapatti, that is implication. That means presumption, or you can call it as postulation. That means all the knowledge that we're getting, we cannot get all the knowledge directly. So out of the set of things that we're getting, we have to assume certain things. We have to assume certain things. So when we consider the question that we have discussed earlier, in that Anil is a student who is not that active at home, or he is a person who is a bit indifferent in the classroom as well. But when we consider his results, he is like he is scoring good marks, or he is scoring outstanding marks. So this from this particular set of things, circumstances, we are presupposing or we are postulating that, okay, this person is an indifferent kid in class, and he is not that active at home also, but he is scoring good marks. So we are postulating, or we are presuming that this person will be studying alone. This person is studying silently. So that is something that we are implicating, or this is an implication that we are making out of, right? So that is Arthapatti, implication. From the set of circumstances that we have, we are postulating certain things. We cannot obtain everything and anything directly, or all the knowledge is not immediately accessible. So from what we have, we are coming to certain postulations. So that is Arthapatti. Then we have Anupalabdhi, and Anupalabdhi basically it is the source of knowledge, or it explains the absence of something. In order to perceive the absence of something, we need a source of knowledge, right? When we are considering perception, if the presence of something can be easily identified by perception. We can see that particular thing. On the other hand, in order to understand or in order to sense the absence of a thing, we need a source of knowledge, that is Anupalabdhi, which can be called as non-apprehension. So I'm not going into the details of each and every Pramanas right now. I'm giving you a general idea so that you can make your preparations based on these foundation. So if that's the case, if we consider this question, I have already explained this question during our explanations that I have given in about the 6 pramanas. So what happens here? Anil is a person who is indifferent in the classroom, and his parents also says that he is not that active at home as well. But his performance in examinations ranges from being good to outstanding. So these are some of the set of circumstances that we have at our hand. From that, we are making certain implications, postulation, presumptions. So we are saying that, okay, as he is not that active, but still he is scoring good marks, so he might be studying privately in a clandestine way. Clandestine simply means secretly or lonely, that kind of a study. So he is studying privately. So this is or this can be considered as an example of Arthapatti. So if we consider these options, we have Upamana, Anumana, Anupalabdhi and Arthapatti. We have discussed about all these types of Pramanas as well. So the right answer for this question is Arthapatti, that is option D. Next question, which of the following Pramanas are accepted by Vaisheshika philosophy? So this is an area that is explored in the recent exam. We got a few questions from this particular area. This is based on the Indian philosophy. So if we consider the Indian schools of philosophy, we have two different groups that comes under Indian schools of philosophy, which includes Gnostic and Astic. So this Gnostic group or this Gnostic school of philosophy basically rejects the authority of Vedas, whereas this Astic group accepts the Vedic authority. And under this Gnostic, we have Charvaka, Bauddha and Jaina. From this Bauddha, we have Buddhism, and from Jaina, we have Jainism. So these Gnostics, they reject the authority of Vedas. On the other hand, we have Astics who is accepting the Vedic authority. So these Astics are known as orthodox, and these people, Gnostic, or this group is known as heterodox. Okay, so under Astic, again we have two categorization. These are people who are accepting the Vedic authority, and under this there are certain schools, they are based on Vedic teachings. So these are some of the schools that are purely based on Vedic teachings. On the other hand, we have certain schools, even though they accept the Vedic authority, they are having an independent growth. They are having an independent foundation in itself. They accept the Vedic authority, but they have grown as an independent stream. So under Astic, we have two categorizations: schools based on Vedic teachings and schools based on independent growth. And under these schools based on independent growth, we have Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya and Vaisheshika. So these are different types of different schools of philosophy which comes under the Indian, under the broader term of Indian schools of philosophy. And under schools which are based purely on Vedic teachings, we have Mimamsa and Vedanta. So Mimamsa is a school that is emphasizing on the ritualistic aspect of Vedas, whereas Vedanta is focusing on the reflective aspect of Vedas. That means Mimamsa, they said that the ethical or moral things that are mentioned in Vedas are really good. We have to follow those ethicalities, but this grace, this faith, this God, that doesn't make any sense to Mimamsa school of philosophy. Even though they accept Vedas, they are following the rituals or the ethical aspects that are mentioned in Vedas. They doesn't believe in Ishvara or God, whereas in Vedanta, they purely focusing on this Vedas, and they are following it in a reflective way. They consider Vedas in more like a reflective way. So that is a distinction that you can make out of Indian schools of philosophy. So if we consider these various types of schools of philosophy, we have already studied different pramanas, different sources of knowledge. So each of these schools of philosophy, they are accepting certain pramanas or certain sources of knowledge. If we consider Buddhism, they consider Pratyaksha and Anumana as source of knowledge. If we consider Jainism, they are accepting Pratyaksha, Anumana and Shabda as the sources of knowledge. Then we have Charvaka, which is school of materialism. They consider this Pratyaksha only. They are people who are saying that Charvaka is a school of philosophy which is associated with materialism, and they are saying that only the things that we can perceive directly can be considered as knowledge. That's why we are mentioned here it as Pratyaksha. What all things you can see, you can perceive, that alone can be considered as knowledge. That is what Charvaka school of philosophy says. Then you have Vaisheshika school of empiricism, which is accepting Pratyaksha as well as Anumana as source of knowledge. Then we have Nyaya, that is school of logic, which actually supports Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana and Shabda as various sources of knowledge. Then you have Sankhya, which is school of dualism, which supports Pratyaksha, Anumana and Shabda as a source of knowledge. Then we have Mimamsa, the school of orthopraxy. I have already mentioned what this orthopraxy, because Mimamsa school, they are focusing on the ritualistic aspect of Vedas. They consider Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Arthapatti and Anupalabdhi as a source of knowledge. And finally, you have Vedanta, which actually considers all sources of knowledge like Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Arthapatti and Anupalabdhi as the various sources of knowledge. So, as I have mentioned earlier, Indian philosophy can be divided into Nastic and Astic. Under that, we have various schools of philosophy. And if we are considering each of these schools of philosophy, each of them are considering certain sources of knowledge as authentic. That is what this entire table is all about. And in the recent exam, they have focused in this area as well. We have got several questions that were focused on what are the sources of knowledges that were accepted by Vaisheshika, what are the various types of sources that are accepted by Buddhism. So that kind of questions were asked. So what we can do is have a general idea about the various schools of Indian philosophy and also try to understand or make a list of these various sources of knowledge which are accepted by each of these schools of philosophy. Coming back to our question, which of the following Pramanas are accepted by Vaisheshika philosophy? So I have already mentioned Vaisheshika here, which is a school of empiricism. They accept Pratyaksha and Anumana as a source of knowledge. I have already explained what is Pratyaksha and what is Anumana in our previous question. If that's the case, you can just take these two options as your answer. That is A and B. So from the options, you have to find A and B only. That is option A. Moving towards the next question. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. There is smoke in Mr. Verma's chamber. There must be fire in Mr. Verma's chamber. In accordance with Indian logic, this is an example of, and you have the options, Pratyaksha Pramana, which is perception, Pratyaksha, Upamana, which is comparison. Then we have Hedva Bhasa, which is fallacy. We have different types of fallacies. So Hedva Bhasa can be translated as fallacy in English. Then we have Vyapti, that is invariable relations. So what happens here, if you consider this particular option that is given here, you can see that wherever there is smoke, there is fire. So here you can see a connection between smoke and fire. Right. The thing is, you have seen smoke in Mr. Verma's chamber. There is smoke in Mr. Verma's chamber, and that smoke actually results, or that smoke lead you to a conclusion that is the presence of fire in Mr. Verma's chamber. So you haven't seen fire coming from Mr. Verma's chamber, you're just seeing smoke coming out of Verma's chamber, but just by seeing that smoke, you're inferring that there is a presence of fire. Why you're saying, or why you're coming to that kind of an inference? That is because wherever there is smoke, there is fire. So there is a universal, or there is an invariable concomitance or relationship between smoke and fire. That is what this statement says. Wherever you see smoke, you infer the presence of fire there, right? When you're going through a road, when you're seeing a hill there, and if smoke is coming from that hill, you automatically assume that, okay, there is a presence of fire. You don't have to see the fire. If you're just seeing the smoke, you automatically infer the presence of fire there. If you're walking through a street and suddenly a smoke is coming out of an apartment, suddenly you will infer the presence of fire in that apartment. You don't have to see the fire coming out of it. You just have to see the smoke. What is the reason? Wherever you see the smoke, automatically there happens, or you come to an inference that there is the presence of fire. That is because there is a connection between smoke and fire. Wherever there is fire, there is smoke. Wherever there is, or wherever you are seeing smoke, you will assume the presence of fire there. That is the correct relationship. Okay. Wherever you are seeing the smoke, you assume the presence of fire there. All right. So this invariable or this universal relationship between smoke and fire is what actually leads you to a conclusion. You have seen the smoke, you have just seen the smoke, but you know that there is an invariable relationship between the smoke and the fire, and that is what leads you to a conclusion, that is the presence of fire in Mr. Verma's chamber. If that's the case, the invariable relationship between smoke and fire can be called as Vyapti or invariable relationship. So this Vyapti is the logical foundation of an Anumana, of an inference. Okay. You are trying to figure out the universal connection between these two aspects, smoke and fire, and that is what leads you to a conclusion. So that relationship can be called as Vyapti, the relationship between smoke and fire in the previous example. So the right answer for this question is option D. Moving towards the next question. The term Paksha, according to classical Indian school of logic, refers to which of the following terms in the process of inference? And you have the options: major term, undefined term, minor term, and middle term. So in the previous examples or the previous question, we have discussed about Pramanas, one of the main one of the main areas that you have to study. Then we have discussed the Indian school of philosophy, that is again an important area. Now we are discussing, and after that we have discussed about Vyapti, that is associated with the structure of an Anumana, that is again very important from that point of view. And now we are coming to a point where we are discussing the various terms that are associated with the Anumana, the various terms that are associated with an inference. So if you consider this particular example, the hill is fiery because the hill is smoky. What happens here? What is an inference? You are inferring the presence of fire on the hill. The hill is fiery is an inference. And what really leads you to this particular conclusion is the presence of smoke that you have seen at the hill. So if you consider this, you have a hill here, then you have a fire here, then again you have a smoke here. You have three different terms in this particular argument: hill, fire, and smoke. So if that's the case, the inferred character, or when you're seeing the smoke that is coming out of hill, what you're inferring from the presence of smoke, that is fire. You're just seeing the smoke, but the inference that you have made is fire. So that inferred character is fire in the previous example. That can be called as sadhya in Indian logic or Nyaya school of philosophy. The same term can be called as major term in Aristotelian syllogism, or in other words, major term is basically the predicate of the conclusion. We have already did a video on syllogism. Those who haven't yet watched that video, you can just go and watch that syllogism video. So this entire concept will be clearer for you. So the predicate of the subject is fire here. So that is the major term in Aristotelian syllogism, and that can be called as sadhya in Indian logic or Nyaya school of philosophy. And then you have the reason, that is smoke. And why you have inferred the presence of fire on the hill? That is because you have seen smoke coming out of the hill. So that is the reason why you have inferred the presence of fire on the hill. So that reason can be called as hetu, linka, or sadhana in Indian logic, and it can be called as middle term in Aristotelian syllogism. So this smoke is what makes you to infer the presence of fire on the hill. Then you have the subject of the conclusion. The subject of the conclusion is the minor term of a syllogism. So predicate of the conclusion is the major term, and that we call as sadhya in Indian logic. And the subject of the conclusion, that is hill here, that can be called as minor term in Aristotelian syllogism, and it is called as paksha in Indian logic. So I have already mentioned, those who haven't watched the syllogism video, you might get confused about this. Just go and watch and come back so that this entire idea will be clearer for you. So sadhya in Indian logic is major term in Aristotelian syllogism. Hetu, linka, or sadhana in Indian logic is middle term in Aristotelian syllogism. Paksha in Indian logic is minor term in Aristotelian syllogism. If that's the case, what's the question here? The term paksha, according to classical Indian school of logic, refers to which of the following terms in the process of inference? As I have already mentioned, paksha can be equated with minor term. So the right answer for this question is option C, So that is minor term. Okay, now we are moving to next area. This is about, this is a question that was asked from the topic types of Anumana. So we have roughly 6 to 7 types of Anumana, and this has to be, these kinds of Anumanas are categorized into different groups. So this particular question is based on that. The distinction between Purvavat and Sheshavat is made with reference to which of the following Pramanas? And you have the options Anumana, then you have, this is Pratyaksha and comparison, then you have Abhava. So Abhava, okay. So if that's the case, what's the question here? You have to figure out the Pramana which includes Purvavat and Sheshavat. So this Purvavat and Sheshavat are basically two different types of Anumanas, or two different types of inferences. So as I have mentioned earlier, we can categorize these different types of Anumanas into different groups. In that, one kind of category is a type of the types of Anumanas that are categorized on the basis of causal relations. And according to this particular categorization, we have 3 types of Anumana. First one is Purvavat. What happens in Purvavat? We are inferring the unperceived effect from a perceived cause. That means we have seen a particular cause and we are inferring, we are only seeing the cause. We are seeing only the cause, but from that cause, we are inferring an effect that is not yet has come. That means if, just consider this example. When, for example, when from the presence of dark heavy clouds in the sky, we infer that there will be rainfall. So what happens here? You have just seen the dark heavy clouds. You're just seeing clouds in the sky and you are inferring that, okay, there will be a heavy rainfall that is coming very soon. So what you're perceiving here is a cause alone. You're just seeing the clouds in the sky, but you're saying that, okay, there is dark clouds in the sky, so there is high chance, so there will be a rainfall very soon. So from a perceived cause, you are inferring an unperceived effect. You are just seeing the clouds, but from that you are inferring you are inferring that there will be a rainfall very soon. So that is Purvavat. And what is Sheshavat? It is just the opposite of Purvavat. So what happens here? You are inferring the unperceived cause from a perceived effect. So here what happened is you are inferring the unperceived effect from a perceived cause. Here you are inferring the unperceived cause from a perceived effect. That means, for example, when we see a river in flood and infer that there was heavy rain, we have a case of Sheshavat inference. That means you are now seeing the effect. You are seeing the effect. You are not. You haven't seen the cause for it. You are just seeing the effect. You are seeing a flooded river. From that, you are inferring that there was a rainfall. A heavy rainfall has happened in this particular place. You haven't seen that rainfall. You are just seeing the flood. So from that effect, you are actually inferring a cause. But in Purvavat, what happened? From the cause, you are inferring an effect. Here, just the opposite. From the effect, you are inferring the cause. That is Purvavat and Sheshavat. Then we have another type of Anumana that is associated with this particular categorization. That is Samanya Dhutrishta. So what happens here? This inference is based on certain observed points of general similarity. That means this is not like a cause and effect kind of a relationship, but we are inferring certain things from certain observed points of general similarity. From general similarity, we are inferring some of the conclusions. So I have just added an example here. I'll just read it out for you. When we see a horned animal and infer that it has cloven hoofs, we have a case of this inference. There is uniformity of coexistence between horns and cloven hoofs, though they are not causally related. That means if you're seeing an animal with horns, if an animal is having horns, suddenly we are inferring that, okay, this particular animal is having horn, so obviously it will be having cloven hooves. So cloven hooves, I know you might be very familiar to that. It is about the hooves are there in the feet. Just Google that particular image, so you can just see what is cloven hooves. So it is, when we're seeing, there is a general idea or general similarity that is there, which says that horned animals are having cloven hooves. So there is not like a cause and effect relationship that can be seen here. But what happens here, there is a general similarity. All the animals which is having horns are having cloven hooves as well. So when you're seeing a horned animal, you are assuming or you are inferring that, okay, this particular animal is having horns. So obviously, this animal will be having cloven hooves as well. So that kind of inference that are made out of certain observed points of general similarity, because if you consider animals with these horns, all the animals with horns, when you are observing them, they are having cloven hooves. So if you are seeing another animal with this particular horns, you are automatically inferring that, okay, all the other animals which are having horns are having cloven hooves as well. So this particular animal is also having horns. So obviously that animal will be having cloven hooves. So that is an inference that comes out of general similarity. So that can be another type of Anumana as well. So in this question, what the question is all about is the distinction between Purvavat and Sheshavat is made with reference to which of the following Pramanas. So Purvavat and Sheshavat is basically two different types of Anumanas or inference. As I have mentioned earlier, according to causal relations, we have three kinds of Anumanas. We have already discussed all these three types of Anumana. So this Purvavat and Sheshavat is associated with Anumana or inference. All right. Another important area that we have to study under Indian logic is fallacies or Hedva Bhasas. I have already mentioned it in one of the questions. We had it as an option. So I said that Hedva Bhasa can be translated as fallacy in English. So it is a question that is again asked in June 2020. Asitha is a fallacy when the middle term is, and you have the options unproved, too wide, too narrow, and non-exclusive. So Asiddha or Sathisama. Sathisama is another term for Asiddha. It is a kind of fallacy which occur due to unproved middle. So unproved middle, it's what leads to an Asiddha. So as we haven't dealt with this middle term, major term, minor term, and all that in detail in this particular video, I'm not going into the details of this unproved middle, but I have just mentioned an explanation here. The fallacy of Asiddha occurs when the middle term is wrongly assumed in any of the premise and so cannot be taken to prove the conclusion. That means we said that middle term is what actually links the various premises together and leading us to a conclusion. But let's say if this middle term is wrongly assumed in one of the premises, it cannot lead us to a proper conclusion. Middle term is what links various premises together and leads us to a conclusion. That is true. But if there is something that happens to the middle term itself, that means if the middle term is wrongly assumed in the premise, then how can it give you a proper conclusion? So that kind of a wrongly assumed middle term can be called as an unproved middle, and the fallacy that happens due to this unproved middle can be called as Asiddha or Sathisama. So we are not going into the details of this unproved middle and all that. Just remember this much for the time being. Asiddha or Sathisama is a kind of fallacy that occurs due to the unproved middle, due to the presence of unproved middle. So this is a very direct question. You have the option unproved here. Asiddha is a fallacy when the middle term is unproved. So the right answer for this question is option A. So in this particular session, in this live session, we have discussed 5 to 6 questions that were asked in June 2020 NTA exam that were from this particular area, interlogic, and through which I have mentioned to you few of the most important areas that you should not skip when you're preparing for NTA UGC NET and JRF paper 1, especially when you consider Indian logic. So we said that Pramanas is one of the most important areas that we have to study. Then we have the Anumana, the structure of Anumana, and then we studied about the various terms that are associated with an Anumana. Then we have discussed about the fallacies that can be present or that can affect the entire process of the construction of an argument. Fallacies, again, an important area. Then I have mentioned about the various types of Anumana, and I have just introduced 3 different types of Anumana as well in this particular video. So these are some of the major areas from which we are getting questions. Then again, the Indian philosophy, Indian school of philosophy, that is a recent area that India has explored when we consider this Indian logic as a part of our logical reasoning modules syllabus. So please do remember that this particular area is a very new updation, but still the questions, the number of questions and the depth of questions in this, or the depth of questions that were asked from this area is not like from a very new area. In each and every time, in each and every term, they are exploring new areas in Indian logic. So what we can do is, at least we have to study the areas that were asked in the last exam. So try to figure out the major areas. I have already introduced to you few of the most important areas that we have to study under Indian logic. So concentrate on those areas. Have a general idea about the various concepts that are associated with it as well. So I hope this particular live session will be helpful in your preparation, as we are going to have an exam very soon. So I hope this video will help you in your preparations. Thank you.